Welcome back, ladies and gents. Today is a long overdue video where we're going to explore some of the pros and cons of the three main universal packaging systems out there. And those three, of which we are pretty much all familiar with, hopefully, is Flatpak, Snaps, and AppImages. Honestly, the amount of conversation that happens in comment sections around the internet around these three universal packaging systems and which one is better and why, it rivals the flame wars of Debian and RPM. I feel like nobody cares about native package management anymore, except for those who are already in the comment section saying that all of these are trash and native package management is the only way forward. But I see it a little bit differently. And I'm sure there are plenty of people out there who share a similar opinion to me. Now, it's completely fair and reasonable to have your own opinion about any and all of these topics. But I'm going to try and unpack what I see as pros and cons of each of these universal packaging systems. Now, I apologize that we don't have any kind of face cam or anything like that going on. We're trying to figure out a way to make that look decent in the space that I'm in. So for right now, just kind of engage with it as if you were listening to a podcast. And I'll just try and throw some images around here just to keep us all on track with what I'm talking about. Here we go. So first of all, I want to take you back to what the desktop Linux space looked like with package management, even, let's say, 5 years ago. Would that put us in 2015? Maybe even a little bit earlier than that. Once upon a time, if you wanted to run a stable operating system, whether that was CentOS, whether that was Ubuntu LTS, or if it was another system, let's say Linux Mint or something like that, there was a sacrifice that you had to make if you were going to run a stable operating system. And that was you had to have stable packages in your repository. And the native repository was basically the only place that you could guarantee that the software that you were going to install was going to be stable and wasn't going to mess up your system. So that left you with one of two options. You could either continue running a stable LTS operating system like CentOS or Ubuntu LTS, or you could choose to run a more quote-unquote cutting-edge distribution. Or if you wanted to get really out there, you would install a rolling release. Now, cutting-edge distributions were ones that would roll around every 6 months or so, and they would integrate the latest packages and desktop environments into their repositories. I like to think of Fedora as a good example of this. And then obviously there were also rolling releases, things like Arch Linux, later Manjaro, and so forth and so on. OpenSUSE Tumbleweed is another great example. Now, those were the only options if you wanted to have an up-to-date system that had the latest up-to-date applications. That was kind of the only way to make it happen. A compromise that kind of worked, but really ultimately ended up making a bit of a mess of things was third-party repositories. Now, whether that was a third-party repository like Pacman on the OpenSUSE side of things, whether it was a third-party PPA on the Ubuntu side of things, that was the only way that you could add more up-to-date packages than what your distribution offered out of the box. Now, let's use the example of what I'm dealing with here. Right now, I am on Elementary OS 5.1.7-ish. And this operating system is built off Ubuntu LTS 18.04. Ladies and gents, this operating system that Elementary OS is built on came out in April of 2018. So right now we're in September of 2020. So this is like by all standards an old as operating system. But because we're living in 2020, I can run a pretty old OS and still have the latest versions of pretty much everything that I personally use and rely on, whether that's OBS, Skype, Firefox, Thunderbird, Kdenlive, Glimpse or GIMP, whichever is your poison, Mailspring, LibreOffice, you name it, I have the latest version of whatever application I want on a relatively old but pretty rock solid stable operating system base. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the dream that universal packages give to us. Now, there's a few reasons why they do that, and I won't go into too many technical details here. A, because I'm not sure about all the technical details, and B, it's pretty boring. But basically, it revolves around the idea that universal packages get sandboxed, and while they interact with parts of the operating system, they are not tied directly to the libraries and stuff that the operating system relies on. So they're essentially, there's a layer between your apps and between the OS underneath it. Now, for a lot of great reasons, security and privacy and all of those good things, this is really good practice. But also, it means that we can have access to the latest and greatest that the open source software world has to offer without having to worry about being on the latest cutting edge distro or operating system. Right, so that leads us to 3 potential candidates of universal packaging that all cropped up around similar times. We have AppImage that I think is, technically speaking, quite similar to how a lot of Mac apps were packaged once upon a time. All of these universal packaging systems have their own unique technical quirks, and I'm not going to get into them too much, but let's start by talking about AppImages. What are the strengths? What are the weaknesses? In my opinion, AppImages are fantastic because you can take the AppImages that you download, you can freeze them at that particular release, you can lump all of your AppImages into one folder, and by one simple copy and paste command, you can have all of the apps that you ever want or need on your new system ready to roll. These AppImages, I think, are the most portable, stable, and fantastic way to get a bunch of software from one system to another system and know that all of those are going to behave exactly the way you want them to. As you can see here in appimage.github.io, there are a bucket load of AppImages out there. And depending on who your software developer is, a lot of software developers are opting to create an AppImage that's available to download just as you would download a Mac app or as you would download a Windows.exe or a .msi. A good example for me, in my case, is Plexamp. Plexamp is a fantastic little music player app that ties in directly with the Plex music server that I've got all my music on. And it works and looks and functions very, very, very similar, if not exactly the same, with the Plexamp app on my phone. And so it's a nice, just little background player for accessing all my music. Now, one tip that I will give you is that if you are going to be using a lot of AppImages, it pays off to integrate them a little bit more into the system. Now, the way that I've done that in the past is using AppImage Launcher settings, AppImage Launcher, and you can download stay with me here, a .deb to enable better integration between AppImages and your system. Basically what it does is it throws them all into an applications folder in your home folder and just keeps them organized and keeps the menu icons present where they should be so things don't get weird for you. Now, the downsides of AppImages is that up to this point, I don't believe there is a straightforward universal way to update these applications as updates become available. Usually updates are bundled into the application itself. If the developer chooses to enable AppImage update on their app, as you can see this one here has, then you can go and grab a tool that can go out and update all of your AppImages at once. But it does depend on the ones that actually use or allow support for AppImage update. So yeah, you got to get an AppImage to be able to update your AppImages. So portability is great, but integration with the system is okay-ish, but there's no automatic updating support. So that's like your main downside. And sorry for interrupting, but I realized while I was editing this that I left out one key detail. When it comes to updating, there are so many different approaches to updating. For example, AppImages. To my knowledge, you have to go out and download the entire AppImage over again if you want to get the newest updated release. Not terribly efficient when it comes to bandwidth. On Flatpak, for example, Flatpak do have some sort of delta update mechanism, but usually, in my experience, the updates that you download are still quite heavy. You still have a lot of extra stuff that you got to pull in with every new update that comes out. Now, Snap packages, on the other hand, for some reason, seem to be able to download pretty quickly, and delta updates between Snap package updates are very, very minimal. Now, again, there's got to be technical reasons why this is the case, and I don't fully understand them, but what I do know is that Snap packages take almost an instant to be able to roll through and update even some of these big applications. Flatpaks take forever, not forever, but just a little bit longer, and then AppImages take the longest of all, in my experience. Very much open source, very much free, and very much decentralized. Apart from all of the app images being listed here that are known, here on this GitHub page, it's very decentralized. There is no one single server or single place where you need to go and download app images. All right, let's move on. Let's talk about snaps. Snaps are they are a little bit more complicated. There's a lot more going on here with snaps than there are with app images and with Flatpak. So first of all, snaps are billed as a universal packaging system that's available for any Linux-based system out there. Now, unlike AppImages and unlike Flatpak, snaps can also be used for development tools, back-end libraries, and general package management, as opposed to Flatpak and AppImage, which are mostly concerned about shipping desktop applications for the Linux desktop. Now, of course, coincidentally, Snap packages also ship desktop applications, and that's usually what we see front and center. But a lot of the technological stuff that's going on here also allows Snap packages to be used on a server, to be used in Internet of Things infrastructure. A lot of different applications and packages can be put together into a Snap, and then and all of the benefits that come from Snap packages, so an abstraction layer between the operating system and the application that's running, automatic updates, and a wide universal software install base, they're all applicable. And whether you're a development tool or an actual application that people use on the desktop, you get to enjoy those benefits. So there's a few different components to Snap packages. First of all, there's the Snap itself, that is the package itself. There is the Snap daemon, which is what runs in the background to update your snaps and manage them automatically. Then there is the Snap store, and then there is Snapcraft. Now there's a fair bit of pushback against snaps for the reason that people believe that snaps are proprietary or have some element of proprietariness to them, and so they are by default an enemy of all things open source. Now, while there is one component of this whole thing that is not 100% open for people to audit and have a look at, there's actually a lot more that's open source here than what isn't. Anybody can go and create a Snap package or have access to the code of the Snap daemon, or use the framework and tools that Snapcraft provide to package their stuff. What is maintained by Canonical in a closed setting is the store itself. So literally the server that hosts the reference files to go and point it to a particular Snap package, that server is controlled by Canonical. The pros of this, in my opinion, is that you get one central repository where any app developer who wants to target a large Linux base can publish their app. Case in point, Todoist can publish a Linux app and push it out to one central software repository, essentially, and target a bunch of different Linux platforms at the same time. That's the upshot. The downside is that if Canonical at some point decided that they no longer cared about snaps and that they were just going to shut down their Snap store, that means that that entire ecosystem dries up and shrivels, in that it can't, many parts of this process can be forked and recreated, snaps, the daemon, and Snapcraft tools, but the store itself, the server that has the reference files that allows people to browse and find the software that they want, that would effectively go away. I don't know. Now that's kind of worst case scenario. Now for me personally, this doesn't bother me at all. I don't mind that Canonical has control over the server that they are paying for and that they are maintaining. The fact that they have all these other components that they have open sourced, made available to anybody who wants to go and use them, I think is excellent. And sure, it would be great, I guess, in theory, to have the actual storefront be open source and accessible for everybody to see what's going on there as well. But unfortunately, this would kind of lead to a little bit like what happened with PPAs, where Launchpad was originally not open sourced. A bunch of people complained about it. They eventually did open source it, and then nobody contributed anything to Launchpad anyway, and it ended up didn't really solve any particular problems. So long as Canonical is invested in snaps, and it appears by all standards they are, then I don't mind the Snap Store being controlled by Canonical, because it keeps everything in one place and solves the problems that AppImages kind of have, in that they're scattershot all over the internet. That leads us finally to Flatpak. Flatpak has a dear place in my heart as well, because this understands how to integrate these apps in the desktop space really well. AppImages and Snap Packages both have some issues when it comes to theming. Theming can be a little bit wonky depending on the application and how it's been packaged, whereas Flatpak, for whatever reason, seems to have got on top of this pretty quickly. They understand, and the whole process is geared towards packaging desktop apps on Linux. Now, contrary to what some people might think, FlatHub is not the only place that you can go and get Flatpaks. It just happens to be one of the most popular places to find Flatpak applications. And in my opinion, between all three of these systems, Flatpak, Snap, and AppImage, you have pretty much access to every single piece of software that is available in the open source community under the sun. Now, the downsides of Flatpak is that you can't have system tools, back-end development libraries, all these sort of things rolling along with you, in that you only have desktop-facing apps that are available here on your desktop. That's about the only downside I can think of with Flatpak. And because of that, usually my order of preference will be that if I can find a particular piece of software on FlatHub, I will use that first, and I will install stuff from there first. So things like, for me, OBS, Boxes, and other software, usually Spotify as well, are all from FlatHub for me. Then, if there is a particular piece of software that I know I want to remain stable and keep at a particular release that works well for me, for example, Kdenlive, my video editor, I will use the AppImage for that. And then finally, Snaps and the Snap Store, for me, provide a lot of proprietary or semi-proprietary software. Let me show you what I mean. So things like Journey is a digital journaling app that I use across a bunch of different platforms, including my phone. They have a Linux version on the Snap Store that I use and take advantage of. The same could be said for Todoist, if I was using that on the daily, and Mailspring, which is an email client that I've used for better or for worse. Now, it is worth mentioning when it comes to performance that personally, I see a little bit of lag opening AppImages for the first time, and then an even smaller sort of pause after you have opened AppImages for the first time. The first time it does that, it takes a little bit, just like a beat longer than every other time it launches, but it's still pretty performant. And then Snaps, obviously, they got a terrible reputation in the first few iterations for having really long load times. I still find this to be true with some applications, especially on first launch, but after first launch, I don't find them loading any slower than any other app, especially because usually I'm loading relatively beefy applications through Snap Packages. But definitely for me, the best performance that comes both on first launch and subsequent launches come from Flatpaks. Again, it's kind of another reason that I really do put Flatpaks at the top of the priority list when it comes to finding where I'm going to get my software from. But the performance between all three of these nowadays, especially on beyond your first launch, is pretty comparable across the board in my own experience. And this is with plenty beefy machine with an NVMe SSD drive and all that fun stuff. I can't comment on less capable hardware. Maybe it does take a really long time. I don't know. I know this video was really dense and verbatim, and I'm hoping that if you've stuck with it this long, then you'll have some more information that can help you make an informed decision about what software you want to run on your system and why. Personally, I see all of these as having their own pros and cons, and it's a fantastic time to be alive to be a desktop Linux user because of these three systems and how much easier it makes life for the rest of us. So keep it civil down in the comments. Let me know what your order of preference is and why. And honestly, apart from elementary native apps, there's barely anything that I install from the Ubuntu repositories in terms of package management. When you look at all of these three universal app systems from a developer standpoint, it's also a dream come true, because when you push an update out to an app, you know that update will hit a bunch of users all at once. You get much better targeted feedback. Just pushing an update is far less convoluted than trying to get your update into a bunch of different distros' package management systems. Testing and quality assurance becomes a whole heck of a lot easier. There's just so many upshots to all of these, whether it's snaps, AppImages, or Flatpaks. Let me know what you think. I'm always curious to hear. And I'll see you guys in the next one.